It is Friday, May 12th. Let's talk PlayStation. So, there are a few things I wanted to talk about with you guys this week. So, our first thing being PlayStation VR. So, there's this research firm, and I think we've talked about them before. They've given statistics earlier about PlayStation VR. But this research firm, SuperData, released some data suggesting that the first quarter of 2017, Sony sold around 375,000 PlayStation VR units. Now, if you go back to a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, whenever this was, Sony Interactive Entertainment President and CEO Andrew House said that PlayStation VR was around 900,000 units that they had sold up until that point. And again, this was maybe 1 or 2 months ago. I really don't remember. But that was 900,000 units. And so now we're looking at now for the first quarter of 2017, we got 375,000. You got to figure Sony's obviously over a million. So you got to figure they're around like 1.2, 1.3 million, probably around there. That's great numbers for PlayStation VR. This kind of segues into kind of the second part of the story, which is that Sony's going to be increasing production of PlayStation VR. And it's funny because last week I just told you guys, PlayStation VR is pretty much back in stock. Like, it's out in the wild now. It shouldn't be that hard of a problem to find it, and there's actually good deals going on with it, where you can get the base, $400 model where it's just the headset, but you're also going to get the camera for free, and that's kind of a retailer incentive that I believe a lot of just strictly retailers are doing. I don't think that's something necessarily that Sony's doing, but they're probably encouraging it, who knows. And that's great news, and it's great news that Sony's increasing production because, and even further back, that was something Andrew House had commented on, is that they didn't expect PlayStation VR to do as well as it was doing, and so therefore that was what caused the shortage. Actually, there's also a part 3 of this story, which is that one VR developer that I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware of. You might not know their name, but you know their game, Alchemy Labs. That's how you pronounce their name. They made Job Simulator, which is honestly one of the best VR games that you can play right now, whether it's PlayStation VR or on the computer. And they also did just recently Rick and Morty Virtual Reality, which I really hope that comes to PlayStation VR. They just got bought by Google, which is cool. Apparently they're still saying they're very committed to VR, and they'll keep releasing for multiple platforms, including PlayStation VR, which is great. That developer specifically is awesome. They are like the #1 in VR right now because they really do some amazing stuff, and I would love to see them keep making games. But the whole grand scheme of this news story is that Sony's doing very well, and they are the front runner of VR, which was pretty obvious. We've talked about that a number of times, and that's a good thing for Sony in the future. That's why they made this big bet on VR. Granted, they're a console manufacturer, and you can probably get a much better experience on PC with, say, an HTC Vive, especially if you've got a very powerful rig. But that hardware is just not selling nearly as well as how well PlayStation VR is doing, and we all know that's because consoles are vastly more accessible for a lot of people. So it paints a bright future so far for virtual reality, and I think we all knew it was going to be an uphill slope for the adaptation of it, but as of right now, it's looking very good, and it's especially looking good for Sony. So this one I wanted to touch on again, just because it kind of is getting resparked a number of times throughout the past few months. We haven't talked about it in a while, but Crash Bandicoot: The Insane Trilogy, another sort of situation coming up about the exclusivity of it, and if it is or is not exclusive to PlayStation 4. If you remember, the last time we talked about this, I more or less said, it was never really guaranteed at all that this was 100% exclusive, especially given that it's Activision, and that Sony, yeah, definitely has some sort of partnership there. They were on stage at E3 to announce it, and on the surface, it appears to be exclusive, and it's clearly not announced for any other platforms. But more often than not, with a lot of these third-party deals, it is a matter of timed exclusivity, usually within, it seems like the most common term is about a year, and then it can go to other platforms. So basically, the last time we talked about that, I said it was never, that was never sort of a done deal, and now I'm saying, like, you should probably expect it to be a timed exclusive. So anyway, the news story here is that there was a Twitter post of an image from apparently a Best Buy in Canada, and this is the picture. It's saying, 1-year console exclusivity. This could be, a load of bullshit or whatever. So it's a total rumor. Take it for what it is. I'm not going to show you this as straight fact, but it just brings up this sort of conversation again. And I think it's something that a lot of people need to start maybe like realizing that, yeah, it probably is a timed exclusive. At this point, I would be pretty surprised and shocked if Sony locked in complete exclusivity for this title. I know a lot of people get really sort of like weirdly emotional about it that it just can't go to Xbox One. It can't go to, say, Nintendo Switch or PC because it's the first 3 Crash Bandicoot games, but it is Activision. They can do what they want with it. And Activision is a big publisher that they wouldn't. That's another thing too. Like, really think about this. Would Activision really be down for a lifetime third-party exclusive? That's kind of hard to believe. They just don't do things like that, and I can't imagine why they would want to do something like that in this situation. Like I said, they definitely have that partnership with Sony. That's why everything has happened as it has, but just expect this to probably come to other platforms at some point. Now, here's perhaps the biggest rumor of all, but we really haven't talked about this in any sort of meaningful capacity because there's just nothing really to go on other than the fact of wishful thinking. So there was a NeoGAF thread this past week about, Bloodborne 2. Is it going to be a thing? Should we expect it at E3? And so the CEO of Moon Studios, Thomas Mailer, they had done Ori and the Blind Forest. This guy obviously works in the games industry. He's very close within the games industry. He replied to that thread basically saying, I'm 99% sure we'll see it. Which tells you, what does this guy know? And he includes a little happy face. It's just one post, right? So then everybody starts freaking out, going, "Oh, is this going to be a real thing?" That's the thing. We've never talked about Bloodborne 2 because, like I mentioned, there's nothing about it. I don't have to tell you, this is the games industry. Nothing can be kept secret. Some sort of leak or rumor or something happens in regards to a title that big. And if you remember, that's how Bloodborne 2, the original Bloodborne, came to fruition. To the public, is that we had seen like really blurry early clips of it, and people were going, "Oh my god, does Sony have a From Software exclusive?" You remember that? That happened, and it happens with a bunch of other games. So the reason why I never talk about a possible Bloodborne 2, or really any other sort of media outlet talks about it, is that there's just nothing to go on. And there's always the conversation of, well, the game did very well for Sony. Sony owns the rights to the Bloodborne name, so certainly they could do another one if they wanted to. Just it would be a matter of if From Software would be doing it. That's another thing too, is that From Software was vocal about not necessarily wanting to do another Souls game or Souls type games. And who knows how meaningful that was to them when they had mentioned that. Developers often always say the same remarks of never say never. Because it seems like more often than not, whenever a developer does come out and say, we're done with this franchise, or we don't want to do this anymore, or we want to move in another direction, they end up releasing a game that is contradicting what they just said. So now a lot of developers always backpedal and say, well, we didn't necessarily mean that. And that's another thing I guess you always have to sort of realize. It's the same way an interviewer will ask a company, hey, what are you guys doing? Are you working on this game? And it's like, of course they're not going to tell you because they want to save those things for announcements at E3 or, they want it to be on their terms. A developer and a publisher always want the announcement to be on their terms. They're never happy about having slip-ups or leaks or anything like that. I don't need to tell you guys that. So the idea of a Bloodborne 2, we never talk about it. That's the only reason why I'm mentioning it now, because this is the first like teensy little bit of sort of connection to it actually possibly being a thing. As somebody that is very closely tied into the games industry, saying, I'm pretty sure we'll see it. And who knows if he's just being an asshole or if he actually knows something. That's why that's like the little ray of hope we actually have now in terms of a Bloodborne 2. And it would be a great announcement for Sony too. Sony does like to drop some bombshells. They've been doing it the past few years. They do like to have some heavy hitter announcements, and that's, I think, what's really exciting about E3 every single time. You wait for those big announcements, and Sony has definitely been having them the past few years. So Bloodborne 2 would be pretty epic. However, there are a lot of people that say, like, straight up, there's no chance of a Bloodborne 2 happening, and I'm not really sure where they're sort of getting all that confidence, because Sony does own the game. They can do whatever they want with or without From Software. But at the same time, I'm of the mind where it's, Sony wants to do things right. When they work with their developers, they are very attentive to them. They kind of let them breathe and do what they want, and they want to do it the right way. Sony's very vocal about that, and their developers are very vocal about that too. Their developers are going to always say nice things about them, but it's pretty clear that they do do that, especially given the fact that they fund a lot of titles that aren't going to be a huge commercial success, but they do them anyway because they believe in the project and the idea. So theoretically, if Sony does want to do a Bloodborne 2, maybe they wouldn't do it unless it would be in the ideal situation of having From Software develop the game. So therefore, if they can't have From Software do it, then they're not going to do it, period. I could totally believe that as well. Now, for me personally, I need more other than this post on NeoGAF for me to start believing in it. So I'm not going to get my hopes up at all. I need more to start, getting on the hype train, which you should never really do because the hype train is what crushes so many people's insane expectations for video games, but that's just how it goes. Those are just some of the news stories I want to talk about with you guys this week. This Monday will be the start of a new Let's Play. I'm not going to tell you guys what it is. This is one that I just chose straight up purely because it's a shorter game, so it'll be finished kind of... I imagine it won't take that long. Certainly not as long as we typically do, but that'll be all well and good. I hope you show up Monday to see what it is, and I hope you enjoy it with me. Anyway, that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you guys next Friday.